Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
Today on the show with us, a graduate of Aquinas College, a nationally certified teacher of music. Mindy Peterson has an affinity for both music and business. I actually got the opportunity to be introduced to Mindy at a summit conference, Music Business Summit Conference that we were both a part of. Did some exploring, found out your podcast, which is Enhanced Life with Music, the holistic approach at music's effect on everyday lives. As I started to listening to some of the episodes, I'm like, okay, I have to have this individual on the show because you have some really cool stories and how you look at music and how it affects us on a day-to-day life, to me, I think is probably, I know in our world, in our podcast, we haven't touched on this before. So this is really cool. So welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So first of all, as I said in the intro here, you're a music teacher. You've got this, you say affinity in your bio, but I'm going to say it's maybe a natural knack for both music and business. And that's what we talk about on this show, is the business side of the music industry. How did you get started in all this? I understand you were teaching at a very young age, right?
Yeah, I started teaching piano lessons when I was still in high school. And when your question about how did I get started in this, are you talking about business or teaching or the podcast
yes,
or all of the above?
All of the above,
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I did start teaching piano lessons in high school. Loved music. I started taking piano lessons when I was in first grade. Really, really loved it a lot. And was very active in music through high school. And when I finished high school, just thought, I guess I'll go into music because this is what I'm already doing and I love it. So my first semester in college took a bunch of music classes, which I'm glad I did. And I ended up in these classes with all these music majors. And I'm looking around me in class thinking, oh my goodness, these people are way more passionate about music than I am. Like, I love music, but I love a lot of other things too.
Yeah, right.
So I'm looking around thinking these people just eat, breathe, drink, sleep music. And that's not me. And so it was a good experience for me. I was working my way through college, which also was a good experience, because I was working in a business setting, and I'm looking around thinking, okay, thinking of as being a young person looking to support myself, I can be, I'm teaching piano lessons. I'm also working in a business setting. And in this business world, I have paid medical benefits. I have paid vacation days, paid sick days. I have a 401k match. You just really can't compare the security of that with being self-employed as a piano teacher. And I ended up working in a marketing department, fell in love with that. It was a really good mix for me of the creativity that I really liked and also that more logical business side of things that I also enjoyed. So I did end up getting a degree from Aquinas College in business with an emphasis in marketing. And when I worked full-time from then on, it was in business, in marketing, but I always kept teaching on the side. And that gave me sort of my music fix,
right?
That outlet. Yeah. And then once my husband and I started a family and our oldest got to be a certain age, we made the decision to prioritize one of us being a full-time parent or primary parent. My husband had a pretty demanding job. I ended up staying home and gave up the marketing aspect of things and kept up with piano teaching. And it really worked out great. I kind of fell in love more and more with teaching and music all the time.
So let's jump into this podcast world that you and I and 1.5 million other podcasters are doing these days. Your show titled Enhance Life with Music, how did that come about? Because honestly, when we look at music industry showcases, whether it's a live platform or it's streaming, or in our case, in a very informative level of what we do, which is trying to inform and educate people that listen to our shows, you take it from a holistic approach with your guests. And what drove you into that direction?
Yeah, good question. I'll back up a little bit. The way I sort of fell into loving podcasts was my CD player on my car broke, which I feel like just saying that sentence is aging me because there's probably people listening to this that are like, what? CD player in a car? Like, why don't you just stream it? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, my CD player broke, and that was my go-to thing when I was in the car running errands, shuttling kids around. It was listening to different CDs from the library. That was my way to try out different music and genres and bands, and so I was really disappointed when that happened. And at the time, I thought, well, my car was too old to make any sense to have it fixed. So I thought, well, I've been hearing about these podcasts for a while. I've been meaning to check them out. This is the push that I need to do that. So I checked them out and was instantly hooked. Just love them. So fast forward, I don't know, a year or so, I'm listening to all these podcasts, and I'm just like a kid in a candy store with all this material that's available on demand, loving it. And one thing that I love about listening to podcasts is it kind of gets the creative wheels turning in your mind, even if it's on something a little bit unrelated to the topic of the podcast you're listening to.
Right.
And that's what happened. I was exercising, listening to a podcast that was completely unrelated to music, and just kind of had these wheels going on the side. And I'm thinking, I'm always reading in the news all these articles about the latest breakthrough in science and research related to music and how it affects people with dementia, or affects the developing mind of children, or, just all these amazing things that music has the power to do, and how it lights up every part of our brain when people are making music. And there's not really anything else that does that. So I'm thinking, I need to find a podcast that's diving into all these remarkable things that music does. So I went on a hunt for that. I couldn't really find it. And kind of dovetailing with that interest was a passion that I have for music advocacy and music education. I feel like there's this curse of knowledge where if we know something, we just assume everyone else knows it, and they don't. And as musicians, we tend to just assume that everybody else understands, like we do, the benefits of music and how powerful it is and how it can heal and how it can change lives and how it's everywhere, and it does affect all of our lives, whether we consider ourselves musicians or not. And I thought, we just assume everybody else knows this, and then we scratch our head and think, boy, why do they just pour their resources into sports and not music? And I thought, people don't know. If they're not in that world, they don't know the power of music and how it does touch every part of our lives. So anyways, long story short, I went on a quest to find a podcast like that, couldn't find it, and thought, I'm going to start one. So the topics that I focus on are, I would say, tend to fall into two main categories. One is how music does affect all of our lives every day, whether we consider ourselves musicians or not. I have so many friends who are not musicians, and they'll drop these comments regularly like, oh my goodness, I just heard this song and it took me back to senior prom, Right. And it's like, yeah, there's a whole science behind that. The power that music has, kind of like that olfactory sense to just take you back to a moment in time. Or again, a non-musician friend will talk about being on hold for, waiting to talk to some kind of customer service. And they'll say, the song they were playing, oh my goodness, they played the same thing over and over, and it just got stuck in my head. I couldn't get that earworm out of my head for the rest of the day, So that's one sort of main category I would say that the topics tend to fall into, is how music affects our everyday lives, whether we're musicians or not. So topics like the role of music in movies and movie trailers. What would it be like to watch something like that without music? A second main category that the topics tend to fall into that I address on the show are ways that music makes the world a better place. Because there is such a power in music, whether you're talking about healing and whether it's mental health or physical health, emotional health, communication. There's so many ways that music can be used as interventions with autism. Really powerful ways that, again, whether you're a musician or not, these are ways that music can make your life better.
We're going to take a break, get a word in with one of our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Mindy Peterson.
Hey, this is John Cowan, and you are tuned in to the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right. Everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena, and believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. All written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message.
You're listening to the business side of music.
With us from Minneapolis, Minnesota today, Mindy Peterson is in the studio. Along with being a nationally certified teacher of music and hosting your podcast, Enhance Life with Music, you delve into a world that I think a lot of us don't, at least consciously, wrap our heads around. And you said something before the break that I thought was very thought-provoking. Imagine a television commercial or a TV show or a movie that had no music. Just hit the mute button and maybe put on closed caption. You lose so much of the dynamic, don't you?
Yeah.
And it really is an emotion. Music is an emotion. A lot of us don't really look at it that way. But like you said, you hear a song, takes you back to your senior prom. It's good times, bad times, happy times, sad times, doesn't matter. That's something that, do you see with the people that you're talking to these days as guests on your show? Is this something that's being delved into more and more with research and finding out maybe 2 questions, how music is affecting someone and why they're affecting?
I think so. I'm really tuned into a lot of that research because it's kind of my thing. And I do feel like there's more and more of that. Of course, funding is always an issue. If there's funding for the research, then it's more likely to happen. But for example, I just had a PhD on fairly recently who had done some really fascinating research on music training's effect on children's SEL, social emotional learning. And they did really comprehensive research out in California with a group of students in an area, and had sort of the control group who was children who are not really involved in sports or music. They had a group who was involved in sports but not music, and then a group who was involved in music but not sports, and followed them. And it's an ongoing study. I think it was initially supposed to be maybe a 4-year study, and then the research was so fascinating that it was continued. And so I don't know if it's every few years they come out with a new report based on what's happening. But it was really, really fascinating to see the results of her research. And I won't go into all the details here. You can listen to the episode on it. But I do feel like there's more and more research. Nina Kraus is a professor over at Northwestern University in Evanston. She and her group there are also doing a lot of research on the science behind music. She's not in their music department. She's a scientist. There is more and more of the neuroscience and that type of research that's going into this, which is exciting to read and learn about.
I know that we've had music supervisors on the show that talk about finding the right body of work to go into a film or a television show or even a commercial, games, video games, things like that. And there is a science, there is a dynamic to it that, once again, just people that watch a movie don't really get, other than it evokes that emotion that we kind of focus on here. Do you think it can go deeper than that? Can music affect someone in such a way that it could change them? Just
Yes.
that by itself and nothing else.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And again, here there is research that backs up, and I learned about this from someone there in Nashville. Steve Seiler was a guest on the show and talked quite a bit about this research that has been done on the two different parts of the brain. One is used to process words. The other is used to process emotions, one is used to process words like lyrics in a song, for example. The other is used to process melody. And the side of the brain that processes words is, the side of the brain that processes melody is also the side of the brain that processes trauma. So this research that he was referring to was related to people who had experienced trauma and then had read words, had words spoken to them in terms of trying to deal with it. And there was limited results with that. But when those words were put to music and they had heard those words in a song, it connected with them on just an incredibly deep level. He has one of the most moving stories about experiencing that himself that I've heard.
So it is two separate parts of the brain, one that is absorbing the lyrical content, and the other side is the as you said, the melody or the musical connotation of it. And it's melding those two together that seems to be working, is what you're saying here. Yeah,
it brings exponential effect to the words, to the lyrics. And people who have experienced this have said the words in that song, people have been telling me this for years. And mentally, I heard it and I comprehended it, but it didn't really sink in and affect me in a deep way, in a real meaningful way where I could affect change because of it until I heard it in this song.
Wow. And then you talk about how they're now looking at music for, I guess, I want to say this correctly, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but using music to help with the treatment or the research of dementia or Alzheimer's. How's that going into play these days?
Yeah, well, they found through research that the memory of music is the last part of the memory to fade away.
Really?
So you can take someone who's has Alzheimer's, has dementia to the point where they don't recognize their family, and they're, for the most part, unresponsive and are pretty much just sitting in a wheelchair all day, not responding. And what these researchers have done is they've talked to family members of these individuals and found out what music was important to them in their youth, what music they liked. And they've put these into a playlist and played it for them. And it's almost eerie. I mean, it just gives me chills thinking about it, to watch these people right in front of your eyes just come to life when they hear these songs. And there was one example that was in the news recently. It was a video and a news article about a dancer who had Alzheimer's. So she was elderly, but she had been a world-renowned dancer in her youth. And they played something, I think, from Swan Lake. And she went from being non-responsive, just sitting in her chair, to going through, and she's just sitting in her chair, so she's not, physically on her feet dancing, but her arms are moving and she's just swaying. And it just brought all that back. And a lot of times people can go from being non-responsive to actually talking. And it's not a long-term cure for Alzheimer's, right, but for a certain period of time after the music stops, they're still able to continue talking and talking about that time period in their life.
Is it almost like it's a reboot? You almost kind of like you're restarring their memory, their mind. Does it take them back to a point where maybe they start acknowledging people, if not recognizing them with this musical trait being, I don't know, piped into their ears?
I guess I would not use the word reboot or reset. I would use more of an awakening type of a word. It's almost like there was this part of them that was dormant and asleep, and it sort of roused that to some extent before it kind of went back to sleep again. How
long does that effect stay? Is there research on that? I mean, is this a very short term? And as you said, it's not a solution, but it's something that helps kind of rejuvenate them somewhat. Is this short term, or does this last for a certain period of time?
I can't answer that. I don't claim to be a scientist myself, and I don't remember
well, good, that makes two of us.
I don't remember any definitive research on how long it lasts. My guess is that it probably depends on the situation and the person, and perhaps how engrossed in music they were in their youth and how much they continue that throughout their life and how impactful that music was on their life would be my guess.
So this would be music that affected them or influenced them at one point in their lives, or maybe various points of their lives. You mentioned The Dancer with Swan Lake. So like in my case, if I heard, Jeff Beck's Blow by Blow album, which is probably my top 5 albums, that's it triggers, I guess not necessarily emotions, but it triggers settings in your head that takes you to places that maybe kind of corrals your memory a little bit.
Sure. And I think, again, there's a lot of factors that play into it. I think the music that you like is a big part of it. And also the music of your youth can be a big part of it, because during your youth, there's so many things going on in terms of hormones and chemicals, and it just what happens and what you hear and see and experience during that time period in your life really imprints on us.
So it needs to be something that you have a connection to, or it has a connection to you in some manner of speaking. We're going to take another break, get another word in for another one of our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Mindy Peterson.
This is Claire Ratliff from Laughing Penguin Publicity, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Are you curious about Gordon Lightfoot's songwriting process, or what it was like working with Prince in the 80s? Have you ever given any thought to what goes into a golf course design or writing a book? I'm Steve Waxman, the host of The Creationist, a podcast about people who create. Each episode features a different creator sharing stories that I hope will inspire your own creativity. The Creationist is available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio from Minneapolis, Minnesota, Mindy Peterson is with us today, who is the host of Enhanced Life with Music podcast. If you ever get a chance, check it out. I know I've listened to it. You have some great topics of conversation. You have some great guests on there. One of the things that advocating for music through podcasting, now, we all approach in our shows in different directions, and how you work your show is obviously different than how we work our show. But when you say advocating for music through podcasting, where does that come into play for you?
Sure. Well, it kind of goes a little bit back to the example that I brought up about the curse of knowledge, and recognizing people who don't really appear to value music probably. There's a big difference between them not being informed about the benefits of music and the power of music. There's a big difference between that and them being evil and we're going to kill the music programs in your school.
Right.
So to me, education and advocacy they're two sides of the same coin. And there is a difference within advocacy between reactive advocacy and preventative advocacy. Reactive advocacy to me is, boy, I just found out the band and choir program in my school is getting cut. What are we going to do about this? Let's gather the troops here and fight this. That's reactive advocacy. And there's a place for that where we need that. I'm more interested in preventative advocacy with the podcast, where we're educating people about the value of music and the power of music, how much it affects all of our lives. It's the soundtrack of our lives, whether we're musicians or not.
So
looks like you were going to say something.
So let's go down that path for a moment. When we talk about the music programs in school And when I was in elementary school, I think I started orchestra 4th grade. And I think we had flutophone the year before that. And then you got to choose the instrument, or they chose the instrument for you. Are we missing that now with today's youth? Because to me, that program really helped instill an amount of creativity that may not have otherwise surfaced. How early should we start instilling these programs into kids? I said 4th grade for me.
Right.
Can we start earlier than that in school? Should we? Are we missing something here?
Well, if you just ask me, yeah, start it in preschool.
Well, we got to start somewhere, so absolutely.
Yeah, but in terms of, have we lost that? And that totally depends on the school district. I mean, the school districts vary from state to state, and even within states, the school districts can completely vary. So you can have school districts that have completely eliminated funding for music programs and don't have any of it at all. And you can have school districts that have a very robust music program. So it really does depend on the district.
Does it come down simply to the funding, or does there also need to be, and it always comes down to funding, but should it also be a part of the program where there's interest beyond just the casual level? Should these folks within these districts, should they have at least some kind of a common sense about music? Because to me, it seems like a no-brainer. You have these music programs, you're affecting these children, because we talk about it, music is an emotion, but we just seem to be ignoring it and kind of going through the motions in other areas. Well, what do we need to do to educate the educators, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What do we need to do there to really get them energized and excited about doing something about this?
Right. I think there are a lot of satellite organizations out there who are doing some really great work. I don't think there's one cohesive, collaborative effort between all of them, which it'd be nice if we could come up with something. I know in a district really close to me in the Twin Cities here, there's a school board meeting tomorrow morning, actually, because that district is looking to get rid of their band and orchestra programs. And it's a funding issue, and I get it. Nobody wants to cut programs. It's not like they want to cut this, but
Right.
there's funding issue. And for this particular situation, there has been an organization called Safe School Music. Dr. John Benham is the main person over there. And he's been a guest on my podcast. He's gotten involved in this particular situation and is giving a presentation tomorrow. And he does a fantastic job of taking a look at the funding and why or why not this may make sense or not make sense to get rid of the full-time equivalents, is what they call them in the school districts, of the music teachers. So he does a really great job of looking at the economics of it and saying, it's really going to make more sense to do this in other ways. So he does really great work. There's a lot of other places out there that are also doing good work. Like I said, not one collective, cohesive effort. I guess as a musician and a music educator, I feel like this advocacy issue is our biggest job security because of that curse of knowledge. I feel that if our communities understand the value that's brought to our shared human existence through music, they're going to want to invest in music and in music education and music experiences.
As a nationally certified teacher of music, do you find that kids today are as enamored with learning how to play an instrument as, say, maybe when you were a kid or I was a kid? Back then, you get, in my case, you wrapped your hands around a trumpet and you're like thinking, man, this is cool. I want to march in bands and play on stage. And do those kids have that now? I guess one of the reasons I say that is because how music is being delivered now through streaming services. It's almost become, we kind of joked about it a few weeks ago, some folks I was talking with, it's almost become like an avatar image. They say, if a computer can create some music and can create an avatar, you've almost got the next pop star. And that's sad because we're taking the humanism out of it. So are the kids going to be as motivated, you think, to learn? There's so many distractions. You know, we have the cell phone and we have the iPad and we have 500 channels of streaming television and music. Mm-hmm. Are they willing to spend that time and focus and learn? Is that what you're seeing from your aspect?
I would say it's less than when I was a kid. And I think a big part of that is you have a lot more of the video game stuff available that's easy. It's fun. You know, learning an instrument takes work.
Right.
And it is hard and it's fun and it's rewarding and it's fulfilling. But with a video game, you get to sort of ping those reward centers in the brain immediately. It's like immediate gratification where you're getting those pings and you don't really have to do anything except sit there and, you know, move a little thumb gear. So you get to music and it's like, you know, it takes work to learn this. And so it depends on a couple things, what I've observed. I think a lot of it depends on the kids. Some kids just have that in them where they love music and they have the grit and they have the perseverance and they want to take that challenge on. And they maybe have that love of music in them. A lot of it also is the environment that they're growing up in. If they're growing up in a parental type of an environment that values hard work and values sticking with it and values what they're doing with music, like, oh my goodness, you got so good on that song. You just started it last week. I'm just going to sit and listen, play it for me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you have parents who are really valuing that, that's going to make a big difference in those kids' interests and their level of commitment than kids who are just kind of handed an iPad and say, go, you know, entertain yourself and don't bother me.
Yeah, I think from a parental aspect, when my son picked up the saxophone, and the reason he picked up the saxophone was because there was a girl in marching band that he liked and she played the saxophone.
There you go.
And we kind of had to suffer through the screeching and squawking of the sax playing learning process. And as parents, you know, you still have to show that support, though. You have to say, man, that you're sounding so much better than you did last week. This is great. So that encouragement, I guess, it does start at home. When you're teaching, though, there is still that, because I like what you said, with video games, it is an instantaneous gratification. You push the button, you get the ping, you're rewarded. And learning music, learning a song is so much more difficult. Is there a way to approach that with kids to keep them? Well, first of all, let me say this. Is there an approach to get them motivated, and then once you get them motivated, to keep them motivated so they don't stray off that path?
Yeah, and again, I think it really depends on the situation. I have certain kids who I've taught who they are really into video games, and one of them is playing the Mario Brothers Underworld or Overworld. I don't remember what it's called, some theme song from Mario. So he's playing that right now, and so that's one way to kind of get them engaged. Again, it depends on the parent style too. I have some parents who are kind of like, you know, I just want this to be fun for my kids. And then I have other parents who are saying they are taking piano lessons until they get to be a certain age. They don't have a choice, you know?
Right.
So it kind of depends on that, what the kids' interests are. As much as possible, I love to be able to tap into that intrinsic motivation of the kids if they are interested in a certain type of music, whether it's jazz or video game music or Broadway tunes or the Beatles or whatever it is.
Yeah. And once again, when we get back to what we talked about in the very beginning of the show, you take the music out of these environments. You take the music away from a video game, and it loses so much of its dynamic.
Oh, so totally.
Teaching these kids that, hey, you could be the next music supervisor. I remember years ago, and this is where I age myself a bit, but a buddy of mine is Rick Derringer, and you know, he wrote some big hits, and one of his big hits was Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo. And he and I are talking one day, and he goes, "Yeah, I got approached by this company. They want to pay me to use Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo in this video game." And I go, "Oh, who's the company?" And he told me it didn't mean anything. And I go, "What's the video game?" "Yeah, I think it's called Guitar Player or Guitar Hero or and we did a little bit of research and we went, yeah, you might want to do this.
Yeah.
There's money in them Thar hills, boy. Now we get back to what we talk about on our show. You have to get to the business aspect of things. Look, there's a way for you to enjoy this. You may not be the next Major League Baseball player or soccer player or football player, but you can make pretty good money doing this just by creating content for these different types of platforms.
Sure. And that's one thing that's been exciting about some of the guests that I've been able to talk to also is they've had some really interesting perspectives on getting into a certain field. Like, for example, I interviewed someone from over at Michigan State who were a professor in their video game development program. And he talked about
so wait a minute. There's an actual video game development program at a university.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So he talked about the role of music in video games and kind of talked about, hey, if you're a kid and you're kind of interested in this is what you might want to do. And then there was a guest recently who is a music supervisor, Jody Friedman, who was talking about the role of music in TV and film and kind of the process of selecting a song for a specific scene. And he kind of talked about, if you're in high school and you're interested in, if this sounds kind of interesting to you, hang around the kids who are always videoing everything. They might be the nerds now, but tomorrow they're going to be
They could be the next Steven Spielberg. Yeah, you never know. Yeah.
So it's been fun to hear, what is the typical career path into some of these different industries? And what do you recommend to somebody who's either an adult interested or a high school student who's kind of thinking about that? And actually, I have a student who's in high school, and he listened to that episode by the music supervisor. And at his next lesson, before I could even bring this up, because I meant to, he brought it up and said, I loved that episode, and I think that might be something I'm interested in. And I said, I was thinking of you when I was having that conversation, because he's always posting videos that he's created on Instagram and Facebook and putting music to it. Right. And so, I'm like, I could totally see you doing that.
We have to educate our kids out there and let them know there's this amazing life called the music world that they just have to get involved in. Mm-hmm. How can people find you?
Well, my website is mpetersonmusic.com/podcast. That goes right to the podcast part of the website. So that's the best spot.
Which is Enhance Life with Music.
Exactly.
Let's get that in there.
Yeah, Enhance Life with Music. Thank you. You can find the podcast, Enhance Life with Music, wherever you get your audio. Definitely can look at more information there on the website. If you click on that tab, there is a drop-down menu for archives where you can view all of the episode topics and guests that we've had and kind of browse through there and see what hits your fancy and start there with listening to them. All of my socials, I'm on all the socials. Those are on the website too.
And then you're teaching music, of course.
Yes.
Still doing that. And is that something that can be done online? Because you and I both know that in podcast world, we have listeners literally all over the globe that follow us. Is this something that you can do? How does that work? Could I come to you and say, hey, I want to learn how to play music? Is that something you can do online these days?
Well, my answer has completely changed since a year ago, thanks to COVID.
Yeah.
But I always used to teach all of my classes in person and was like, teaching online. Yeah, that does not appeal to me. I've heard it described as teaching through a condom. And it's like, I get that. Yeah. But, COVID happened and we all started doing it, and you get used to it and you figure out a different style of teaching that works, and it's worked out way better than I ever expected it to, and I'm kind of enjoying it. So yes, the long answer is yes, I can teach pretty much anyone over FaceTime or whatever platform we choose.
Very good. Mindy, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.
You're out. Finished. Expelled. I want you off this campus at 9 o'clock Monday morning.
This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds.